we have created a rate of change that is itself outpacing even our ability to keep up. And so this hypernovelty, which is the term that we invoke in the book, this hypernovel world in which we're living in the 21st century is brand new.
Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so, to listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, so that you can then take that new knowledge and apply it to your ability to empathize with the people around you. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we truly reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and who we truly are. Several years ago, I wrote a blog titled The Problem with Comfort, and I want to read to you a specific section from that blog. The problem is comfort. Over the last 70 years, we have poured our physical and mental energies into trying to create comfort in our lives. I think it's fair to say that since World War II ended, most of our technological advances have focused on making everyday life easier. Microwaves, iPhones, drive-through restaurants, email, commercial air travel, Amazon.com. We've even modified our food to make it easier to grow with as little intervention as possible. We barely have to leave the house if we want something. We no longer have to work our bodies to grow or raise our own food. Heck, we don't even have to cook our own food if we don't want to. 70 years ago, and in some cases even just 30 years ago, if you wanted something, you either had to get up, get out, and go get it, or you had to make it, build it, create it yourself. In many instances, your life depended on you physically working hard just to get the basics. Convenience and comfort have dominated our thoughts and actions, and along the way, we as a society, in total, never committed to replacing the physical work that life demanded of us 70 years ago. Now, don't get me wrong, I love modern conveniences. I like ordering something and having it arrive on my doorstep 2 days later. But there is a problem with comfort. Let me ask you this. How comfortable have you been over the last 2 years? My guess is probably not very comfortable. And I'm not trying to make light of everything that we've gone through over the last 2 years. I'm not trying to say that it doesn't matter or that you should be comfortable with it. I'm just saying our ability to respond to moments of discomfort is out of whack. And that is what my guest this week, Heather Heying, and her husband, Bret Weinstein, write about in their new book, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. Heather is an evolutionary biologist, and something that Heather and Bret wrote struck me to my core as I read the book. When people are too comfortable with what they know, and the world does not look as they have been led to expect, they are at considerable risk of being gamed, of getting angry, of becoming incoherent. If we think about all the ways that our lives have been disrupted over the last 2 years, and really, honestly, way before that, it just wasn't as pinpoint and laser focused as what we've experienced since March 2020. If we think about how our lives have been disrupted from the comfort that we have all sought for so long, what has our response been like as a collective, as a people? Were we prepared for something like this? Not just prepared to manage it individually, but as a collective, as a society. Were we prepared to rely on each other, to give each other the benefit of the doubt, to work collaboratively with each other? These are all topics that Heather and I discuss this week. Her book, along with Bret, is a fascinating look at how modern life, in a lot of ways, sets us up for failure when hard times hit. Because honestly, humans in total are incredibly adaptive and able to, as Heather and Bret call it, niche switch when the moment calls for it. But are we rolling down a railroad track that we cannot break from? One of the things that I love to consider these days when I hear about the latest advancement or the latest innovation, I like to ask the question, I know that we can do this, but should we? I want to jump right into the deep end right off the bat here with a big question after reading your book. Do a lot of our problems today stem from the fact that we are so wrapped up in making our lives comfortable?
Oh, that is a excellent framing. Yes, I would say that whether or not any of us as individuals have been conscious of that, yes, that is a big part of what we have been doing from our climate controlled houses, which are wonderful and allow us to not just survive, but thrive in places on the globe that we would not have been able to do otherwise, to the degree to which we can span the globe and befriend people in far-flung places. These are extraordinary advances that also come with trade-offs. And almost always in modernity, it is largely because we are being sold products as opposed to being able to find the value and the costs in products on our own time. We are being told only of the positives and not of the negatives. And because it's comfort, there is short-term value. And often the long-term hazards or costs are in just that, they're long-term. And so they don't show up until after we've already made the choice or become addicted, or just simply internalized whatever comfort it is into our lives to such a degree that we can't go back.
You warn and caution against revolutions or evolutions or technologies or advancements that replace ancient methods. Why?
Yeah, I think I am not. I'm a progressive. I happen to be politically on the left. Shouldn't matter, right? I mean, I think part of what you're trying to do here is exactly reveal how much we all have in common, how much our values are in fact the same, and what we tend to disagree on when we're having honest discussions about how we think things should go is where we are now and what the methods are by which we should get to the places that we want to be. But the idea of a fair world in which everyone has opportunity to find their passions and to explore them is something that I don't know that I've ever met a human being that didn't actually want that for the world. And so, boy, in doing that, I lost your question. Your question was
replacing ancient methods or techniques with just unquestioned advancement.
Yes. So to say that you're a progressive should not mean that you are simply in favor of all things new. Just like saying that you're conservative, I imagine, should not mean simply embracing all things old, right? That is a strange, naive vision of what it might mean to be either a progressive or a conservative. But I think two errors are happening. Many errors are happening, but two errors specific to your question, which are that there is too universal an embrace of the new solutions that show up without an assessment of whether or not they bring new hazards. And then also, too often, the new is brought in exactly as your question implies to replace the old rather than augment the old. And so, one of the examples about which I have been focused recently is the question of how we stay healthy from respiratory illness, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So, put COVID aside even, but in the late 1800s, in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, there were two kinds of therapy called open air therapy and heliotherapy, right? And the therapy involved getting the patient outside and exposing them to the sun. And these things have value. We now know some of what the value is, even though we may not have known then, and that didn't alter the fact that it had value. But we now know that, for instance, being in a place, being outside, you're much less likely to get infected with respiratory ailments, precisely just because they're much less dense. And the sun itself is healing because you're synthesizing vitamin D, which is absolutely necessary for immune function and so much else. And so antibiotics were created, and antibiotics are one of the great successes of Western medicine. We have in our book a list of 3, and there are of course more, but broadly speaking, surgery, antibiotics, and vaccines are the great masterful successes of Western medicine. But that doesn't mean that they aren't sometimes applied where they ought not be. And we know this from antibiotics, of course, and of course we know this from surgery. But antibiotics came online and replaced rather than augmented the existing things that were working. So suddenly tuberculosis wards, instead of having patients be moved outside and be allowed to thrive in the fresh air and in the sunshine, were now locked down and given antibiotics. And the outcomes weren't as good. Why not both, right? Like, why not both? Why overthrow the old when it's still functional when the new shows up rather than augment the old with the new?
I'm reminded in the book then that you talk about in the context of COVID and what we're currently going through, we went into lockdowns and we very quickly found out that it died in open air. And you made the point, to go back to my earlier question, the problem with comfort, most people couldn't handle spending 2 weeks outside, but that you kind of argued that's what we should have done.
Exactly. It's in the epilogue or the afterword.
Yeah.
We wrote the book. We wrote the book before COVID. We actually, we turned in the first draft in March of 2020. So, people were just beginning to be aware, early March of 2020. And then we did revisions and such and added a couple little things here and there, but it's a pre-COVID written book. And then because of the moment into which it is being delivered into the world, we wrote this afterword in which we say, regardless of where you land on what you think the origins of this virus are, this is really a scourge of our own making. Even if it's zoonotic, even if it's a natural virus, this is a pandemic of our own making because we have become an indoor species. Because we have become an indoor species, and because of the methods of travel that we use, planes, trains, and automobiles, these enclosed little compartments with other people breathing into spaces that aren't refreshed all the time. These are super spreader events waiting to happen. Of course, we know that's what has happened. And then for public policy to tell us to, go home, lock down with all of the other people you might live with, including if you come down with the virus, go home, get your family members sick. This is an insane instruction, right? And it's true that most people do not have the wherewithal at this point to spend 2 weeks outside. That said, if we had been able to, and we're not saying we could have, the world couldn't have done it.
Yeah.
The world, it's just not possible. But we could have actually ended it in 2 weeks that way. And impractical, so impractical as to be completely infeasible. It's not possible to have done it, but this thing wouldn't have lasted.
It's an interesting exercise in just what if. You're right. Chesterton's fence. You introduced me to that idea. Can you explain what Chesterton's fence is? Absolutely.
It was new to me too as we began writing the book. I've long been a proponent of the precautionary principle, especially, as a tropical biologist, as someone who spent a lot of time watching habitats change and get decimated and such, and saying, okay, wait, just hold off on things like introducing those pesticides there until we know what the effects will be. Right? I find Chesterton's fence to be kind of an analog to, or a corollary, even the precautionary principle. So Chesterton's fence is the mind spawn of G.K. Chesterton, who was an early 20th century. I always pause here. I think political philosopher might be the right description of him. And he writes in his 1929 book, The Thing, of two people walking along a road who run into a fence. And it's in their way. And one of them says, get rid of it. Let's get rid of it. And the other one says, hold on. I get that it's irritating you and it's irritating me, but until you know why it was put here in the first place, you certainly should not get rid of it. And it is a caution, right? It is a caution, whereas the precautionary principle is a caution about, doing new things until you can understand what their effects might be and, hopefully that they're reversible. Chesterton's fence is an admonition not to get rid of old things until you actually have a sense of what they're for. And so we talk then through the book, we say, okay, we can use Chesterton's fence to discuss things like Chesterton's organs, like the appendix, right? Or Chesterton's breast milk, or Chesterton's gods, right? There are all sorts of things that humans have done. If you're talking about breast milk, it's since the origin of mammals. If you're talking about gods, it's much more recent. But if it has been around for a very long time and is variable in extent and has some cost to it, and it persists, we argue then it's an adaptation. And that doesn't mean it's good. That doesn't mean it's moral. And that doesn't mean it is still adaptive, even if it used to be. But it does mean that it warrants a pause and a consideration of what it might be doing there before you just haul off and destroy it.
How do we get better at that pause, Heather?
Oh boy, that's a good question. How do we get better at the pause? I think there are traditions, right? There are human traditions that encourage the pause. I think of Buddhism. I think of modern meditation traditions that may or may not be based in traditions like Buddhism that encourage, and even some. I'm much less familiar with these, but sort of pop psychology saying like, okay, before you haul off, count to 10 silently, this sort of thing, right? Before you give your retort to the emotional outburst that just happened in front of you, before you respond with an emotional outburst of your own, count, right? And those sort of little rubrics, the modern one that I just mentioned, can be useful, but I think the more ancient ones like Buddhism are more useful. But this is an individual level response, right? How do we train ourselves individually to be more cognizant of the value of pause before action? How do we do that at the systems level is tougher, and I don't have an excellent answer. We argue in the last chapter of the book that there is a way, that there is a fourth frontier, that there is a way to find a foothill that we can then begin to climb towards more sustainability, towards more universal access to opportunity, and therefore to the skills and passions that everyone has. But we can't blueprint it, and we can't know in advance what that might look like. I think one thing is clear. With the combination of the kinds of election cycles we've got and social media, there's not going to be an ability to put any sort of systems level pause on people with the extant systems in place. It's too urgent. Everything is delivered to us with a sense of urgency. And I guess I would add to that, the ubiquitous, the markets that are constantly, the unregulated markets that are constantly telling us buy. Be consumers first. Be consumers first. Be emotional rather than logical and compassionate people on social media, and remember that whatever it is that you thought was stable, you finally got your guy in office, whoever that is. Well, that's temporary. And so there's, the ability to manipulate us via our negative emotions, via our fear and our anger is, it's dialed all the way up to 11. And it's very hard. I think individuals can back off, but very often individuals have to back off, frankly, by giving themselves sabbaticals from some of that urgency space like social media, which then takes them out of the conversation, which then further selects for the conversation to be even more fear-mongering and anger-inducing and urgent feeling.
My goodness, there is so much in that answer that I have so many questions of. I want to get to the fourth frontier because I had a hard time wrapping my head around what you were getting at there. But before I go there, what happens to us as someone who has studied human evolution? What happens to us in this state where we are constantly bombarded with new and the next thing, and like you said, buy, or we're never in this steady state? What happens to us physically, emotionally, spiritually? Like, what happens to us in this state?
That's a great question, and the short answer is we don't really know. Maybe the main thesis of the book is you know, we start by saying, what's the human niche? And I'm gonna have to go back a few steps here. Hopefully I get to the answer to your question, but every species has a niche. This is, a basic ecological principle, and asking what the human niche is, what environment are we best adapted? We argue the human niche is itself niche switching. We are the ones who can look at a mountain and say, I'll bet there's a valley on the other side and I'm going to go for it. And of course, individuals in all species have done that to some degree sometimes, because that's how they spread all over the world into all the niches that are filled. There has been exploration in every organism, but we do it the most. And in so doing, we in part create the very environment to which we must adapt. And maybe the most fundamental theme of the book then is that because we are such generalists, because we are niche switchers rather than specialists at the species level, very often we have individuals who are specialists who then aggregate, who come together and become, a group that is a generalist group because we're filled with a bunch of specialists. We have created a rate of change that is itself outpacing even our ability to keep up. And so this hypernovelty, which is the term that we invoke in the book, this hypernovel world in which we're living in the 21st century is brand new. We have always been ones who are excellent at dealing with change. It is in fact what we do. It is what humans do. We are so much software, we are so much less of our hardware than anyone else on the planet, any other species on our planet. And so our evolutionary change, that itself allows our evolutionary change to happen much faster because it doesn't have to wait for a reproductive event. New ideas come into being and we change the world with them. And that is evolutionary change, but within rather than only between generations. So, what happens when we're dealing with hypernovelty all the time? We're finding that out right now, aren't we? Right? We in the short term, we've got this stress response that is supposed to be a very quick thing when you're confronted with a fearful predator, a fearless predator, or an avalanche, something that says act now. The fight or flight or fight or flight or freeze response, and that's adaptive when it happens occasionally, but many of us are finding ourselves in that state constantly. And that the bathing of our brains and bodies in sort of the corticosteroid hormones that should be coming on occasionally is going to have health effects for sure. It's going to have direct health effects. It's going to have indirect health effects in the form of sleeplessness, which then itself is going to have health effects. It makes many people catatonic effectively. And so, the doom scrolling that people do is often, again, inside and stagnant, like literally inside, away from the sun, away from the fresh air, not moving a muscle in your body. And that is brand new. Obviously, people have been working at desks, white collar people have been working at desks since, well, the image to mind, I'm trying to think back as far like Dickens, like Dickensian moments, of a poor guy at a desk being barked at by Scrooge, right? So that's been a feature of white collar life for at least over 100 years, and for some people more than that. But even then, even in Dickens' time, it was still fairly rare, and still there was the walking to and from work, and there was still more physical movement. And we are protected, especially since COVID, especially since so much remote work is being done. We are protected from movement to such a degree that our bodies are freezing in place. We are, put aside the actual pathogen for which this is all being done, to avoid it. But we are becoming less and less healthy because our bodies just aren't moving. And, if you had said in the, let me say, 1980s, that sitting at the desk all day was going to be causing lower back problems for people, you probably would have been laughed at. But now, as of 10 years ago, oh yeah, standing desks, that's the thing. Or, even a treadmill desk, or, sitting on one of those big exercise balls so that you're moving a little bit. All these things are improvements for sure over doing this thing where we sit all day, but they still don't get at what we really need to be doing, which is just having, to get back to your very first question, we need to be off balance, actually. Like we need to be off balance a bit physically and mentally, and always but not scared, like not scared into a state of must respond or else, someone I care about is going to die. But I'm thinking, for instance, okay, I took up paddleboarding in the summer of 2020.
Yeah.
And I'd never done it before. And I'm athletic and I'm very physically active, always have been, but I'd never had a great sense of balance. That wasn't where my skills were. I bike and such and ski, but I didn't imagine that balance was where it was at. And the first, 8 times I went out, I fell multiple times, fell in the water. And this last summer of 2021, I've actually never been in the water. Like I've been out paddleboarding, 40, 50 times, and I never fell in. Because you learn how to do it, because you learn, oh, that's right. That's what they mean when they say your core. Like I can feel it now. I can feel like moving from the core as opposed to trying to power through with your appendages, with your legs and your arms. So I heard that for decades, right? Like everyone knows when you get told, oh, you need to strengthen your core. Okay, yeah, I got to do that. Well, but it's entirely in your head until you're out there and you got skin in the game. Like, okay, if you're not actually using the core muscles that you don't yet have, you're going to fall in the water. That's just the proof in the pudding right there. So how do we do that mentally? In part, we need to be interacting, like this, like you and I are doing, and just face to face and in smaller groups and with people with whom we can develop trust, and then push each other around a little bit, push each other's limits a little bit, and realize, oh, I didn't die. I'm good. I actually feel better now.
Man, the personal trainer in me loves that answer that you just, in that example that you just gave. That flows so well into a point in the book that I actually highlighted, and I want to read it now because you mentioned remote work, and I think that's one of those new novel ideas that's replacing the old way of doing things. And you mentioned social media. So I want to read this to you. The exchange of ideas that has occurred around the hearth for millennia is more than simple communication. It's the convergence point of individuals with different experience, talent, and insight. The linking of minds is at the root of humanity's success. Whoa, Heather, like, are we going too fast to removing ourselves from each other? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. Yes, we are, for sure. And, Zoom is amazing, right? Like the fact that you and I wouldn't be talking right now, without it. Yeah. And I've met many, many people, not just during the pandemic, but in the last several years, who I feel like I know now, who I've actually not met in person. And it is a different category. Even having met someone in person once feels different.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
But you can come to know someone. I am amazed at how much you can actually feel like you come to know someone, even if you've never been in their physical presence. That said, there is so much that science does not know yet. There is so much that we communicate in physical reality with one another. We are told, for instance, science tells us that humans don't have pheromones. I don't think I believe that. But, I don't remember exactly where the state of the science is, but we don't have the receptors, and, obviously, other mammals rely on these things, but us not so much. And, there's at least some truth in this idea which is that mammals writ large are very smell dominant, and you can see it in the noses of your pets, right? Like you can see the very long noses, and and this is famous. This is famously true, that they just have so many smell receptors, and they seem to understand the world through their sense of smell in a way that we can't even imagine doing so. And primates actually move that dominance from smell into the eyes. And our eyes move forward on our faces, and we get binocular vision, and we come to have much more reliance on sight than on smell. And in fact, a lot of the olfactory lobe of our brain is actually taken over now with this higher cognitive processing, with scenario building and reflecting on the past. And it's our frontal lobes that in part that was our focus of where we were processing smells when we were pre-primates. So that's all true. We certainly rely on smell less, but really not at all. You sure? I'm not sure. It seems very unlikely that it's just gone. And we all certainly have, all of us who do have a sense of smell and, haven't lost it through COVID, for instance, rely on it even, to tell us things like, beware that, don't walk towards that thing that could be dangerous to you. And we don't have that through Zoom. And we also don't have any ability for touch or for the ways that, as we move our bodies around in conversation, for even just the air to flow in such a way so that you get a sense of literally the impact. Utterly unconscious. No one, I think, is conscious of feeling airflow from other people's gesticulations unless they're quite wildly gesticulating. But is it having an impact on how people engage with one another in actual real life, like in actual real shared physical space? Yeah, I'm quite sure of it. And it's part of why, too, we invoke campfire, both literal and metaphorical campfire is what most of us have been reduced to these last almost 2 years. And it's far better than nothing, for sure. And it allows us to be connected with people with whom we cannot share physical space at the moment. But literal campfire also has the advantage, since they tend to be after dinner, as dusk falls, at night, a space in which you can explore ideas too without feeling like you're fully exposed, right? Because our eyes aren't as attuned aren't as attuned at night, simply because they can't be, because we're diurnal and there aren't enough photons around to see each other super clearly. You see each other through the fire or through the smoke, and you may be more able to put out possible ideas that are riskier, that in an hour, in 5 minutes, the next day, in 5 months, you might say, not so sure. I've rethought it. I don't think so. But having the ability, having a space like this is what an actual safe space looks like, right? Having a space where you can put out ideas that, I'm not talking about grotesqueries. I'm not talking about hatred, but anything that you think is true, and you're with people who will forgive you if you make a mistake. As long as your intent, and you're the person who has to be the one who is deciding what your intent was, and you have to be honest about it. But as long as your intent is, I'm trying to figure out if this thing might be true, or I wonder if this might be a good idea, you should be allowed to say a lot of things that later you might say, yeah, that wasn't true. That wasn't a good idea. I was wrong. And might even be warranting of an apology, but that's what apology is for.
What are the ramifications then of, as you write in the book, being too comfortable with what we think we know? What are the ramifications of that?
They're huge, right? It's certainly easier. And I mean, let me take a trivial example where being comfortable with what you know helps us. And as far as I can tell, actually just makes things better. We live in this world of hypernovelty where literally you go into the supermarket and you have, I'm just going to take a guess here, dozens of options with regard to what kind of dishwasher detergent you want to buy. Like dishwasher detergent, the dishwasher itself, of course, being a modern convenience, but, or, just to put it more broadly, soap. How many hundreds of kinds of soap can you choose to buy? Brand loyalty, which is a kind of comfort, is actually probably an adaptive response to, I don't want to be bothered with thinking about that choice every time I go to the market. It's not worth my time. I want to find something that works. It's fine. And I don't want to have my attention pulled away from the things that I actually am bringing value to the world for doing every time it's time to buy soap again, or toothpaste or whatever it is, or pasta. So in that way, the search for comfort can be a way to a useful tool for protecting your attention, especially in a modern world where everything wants a piece of you. Everything wants a piece of your attention. But in physical space, in mental space, and psychological space, if you decide, actually, I already know the thing. I already know what I believe. I know how I vote. I know what I think about issue X. I know how to do this hike. You're never going to learn anything new. So effectively what you're saying is, right now is all I aspire to. This version of myself is plenty good. And furthermore, it is only plenty good if the world stays exactly as it is right now. So, a naive pseudo-evolutionary perspective, like the one that the social Darwinists and the eugenicists and the people in the Third Reich believed in, says there's one most fit thing, and it's universal. And that's not how evolution works. It's always relative. Best fit for this environment right now. So if you're comfortable with what you currently know and are satisfied to just stick with that, you're not only saying, I'm not aspiring to anything greater or more interesting than I currently am, but you're also guaranteeing that you will slide into less competence because the world is changing around you.
Is it appropriate then to bring up the fourth frontier at this point? Does this slide us into a discussion about the fourth frontier? What is it? And yeah, can you explain that more?
Yeah, I think it is. And I, as I mentioned earlier, we don't define it because we can't yet, because we're not there yet. So I will probably leave you unsatisfied here, but I will do what we do in the book, which is describe the first three types of frontiers, and then segue into the fourth, insofar as I think is possible. So we argue that there are three types of frontiers that people have confronted, and they will be familiar to everyone whether or not they are by these names. There are geographical frontiers, such as the ones that the first Americans, the Beringians, found when they came over from Asia and found two continents, not that they knew that at the time, two continents of just wealth of natural resources that had never been set foot on before by humans. And there are technological frontiers by which humans have transformed a landscape, or in modern times, things smaller than landscapes, to generate more wealth from what was possible before. And so the terracing of hillsides to prevent erosion and runoff and collect the rainwater so that you can grow things on steep hillsides have been one sort of technological frontier that has been innovated multiple times across, from the Haut Plateau of Madagascar to the Inca in the Andes, across everywhere that people have lived in steep terrain. I think some kind of terracing has been invented. So that's a technological frontier. The third type of frontier, and both of those are honorable. There's nothing inherently wrong with them. Although people engaging in technological frontiers often imagine that growth can be infinite, and all life seeks growth. But growth itself cannot be infinite because resources are not infinite. And so the third type of frontier, which is really not a legitimate frontier at all, it's a form of theft, is what we call a transfer of resource frontier. So very often people landing, for instance, in a land that they've never been in before, assume that therefore no one has ever been in it before. And this is just the easiest example to go to is the Beringians actually did discover the New World. And then, many thousands of years later, from the other side of from the Atlantic rather than the Pacific, came a new set of people who imagined that they discovered the New World. And they didn't. That was not an actual geographic frontier. It was for them, but it wasn't for humanity. It was a transfer of resource frontier. And that, and of course, we have more and more of those as we have expanded to fill more and more of the planet. There's very little, if any, arable and habitable space left that hasn't been claimed by someone somehow. And there can be, good faith negotiations over land, but very often now we have We have skirmishes into wars that are exactly about claims of resource that amount to transfer of resources, quote unquote frontiers, which again is a form of theft. So given that we are all seeking growth, that is what life does, but it's not an honorable goal and it can't be a permanent goal. But growth is the thing that makes us feel like we are advancing. The fourth frontier, we argue we need a new kind of frontier. We're out of land. This is the planet we've got, and it's beautiful, but we don't have any more geographic frontiers to discover. Technological frontiers are amazing, but they're also going way too fast. And where it's increasingly hard to put the brakes on some of the innovations that are causing some of the deranging symptoms of modern society. Transfer of resource frontiers are not honorable or legitimate. We don't want to encourage those ever. If we're thinking if we're thinking for everyone as opposed to locally and tribally. So what can we do? What kind of fourth frontier can humanity create that will allow for the sense of growth, that will allow for creativity, productivity, discovery, exploration in such a way that resources are not actually consumed, where we get the best out of humans, out of all humans, where every human is actually able to fulfill their own potential, regardless of what it is, almost regardless of what it is that they want to do in the world, without actually using up more stuff. And so, this is now, we're in the space of metaphor, because I don't have an answer to how it's accomplished. I mean, there are a number of people, and Bret more than me have been involved in many conversations around things like Game B. If what we're doing right now, if all of the politics and the banking system and the markets, the unregulated markets that we're engaged in, participating in right now, are a kind of Game A response to the 20th century, what would Game B look like? How can we create a new way of being that allows markets to do what they do best, but doesn't allow them into the places where they shouldn't be, and actually provides opportunity to everyone, so that the person who wants to be an artist and who is actually good at it can create art that is actually then revealed to other people who on their walks through urbanscapes are seeing good art, rather than that person being trapped in a cubicle doing work that actually serves no one but some giant corporation's bottom line.
Does the problem start in school? Like, are we educating people to think how and why enough and not just what?
No, we're not. Yeah, I mean, school is broken. School's been broken for a while. An argument could be made. I'm not sure it's the complete argument, but I think it's a big part of it. An argument could be made that the model of compulsory schooling that the U.S. adopted from Germany in the, again, late 19th century, because it was precisely about training workers and efficiency and basically training cogs, turning people into cogs so that they could do repetitive things because factories were on the upswing and we needed workers, is part of the basis of our problem. That many of the modern features of schooling have simply been, are simply still there from a moment when training for factory work was the thing that school was often for, training for cogs. And too often, I mean, I'm alarmed that I've actually had conversations with educators who will say, well, of course I'm training them to be cogs. That's what they're going to be. Such people shouldn't be educating anyone, right? That's not education, that's indoctrination, and that does dumb us down. That said, the best education doesn't scale that well. And so you need more teachers who are not just really passionate about wanting to teach, but willing to stand in front of the room or with the students on a field trip or whatever it is, and field almost all questions and say, I don't know, or especially say, I was wrong. Remember that thing I said to you yesterday? I went back turns out I was wrong. Here's how I got there. Here's why I thought what I said was right. Here's how I got there. Like, that's an education right there. But how often do you have teachers engaging students of any age in that kind of conversation these days? It does happen. I was doing it when I was a professor for 15 years, and I know some of my colleagues were too, but I also know that many of my colleagues weren't. And I think what we hear is, they can't take it. It'll confuse them, especially the younger kids. We just have to give them a sense of certainty. No, you don't. You give them a sense of certainty about the world, especially when it turns out you were wrong about your certainty. You help create cogs. Like, you'll end up with cogs who are over certain of things that aren't true.
I want to read you another passage of the book that just struck me. You said, become aware of the constant flow of information telling you what to think, how to feel, how to act. Do not let it into your mind. Do not let it steer you. Your internal reward structure needs to be independent and ungameable. That independence, in turn, should allow you to collaborate well with others who are similarly independent. Be wary of those who may well be nice, but who are captured. Did you and Bret have something specific in mind that you were talking about when you wrote that?
I think I can pull up a lot of anecdotes.
I'd love to hear them.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of what the best way to respond here is. It is so hard for people right now in many environments, in their work environments, in their school environments, to say, I disagree. Even if, okay, here's one. Here's one moment. I have talked about this publicly before, but not in a while. The last quarter that I was in the classroom that I was teaching undergraduates was the fall of 2016, which was coincident with the election of Trump as president. And I was teaching at maybe the most liberal college campus on the planet. I'm not sure that's actually true, but certainly famously liberal, and even more than the already very people of that age tend to be more liberal than conservative. We know, but the faculty in modern American colleges are way more liberal than average, than the average populace. And this is a problem. This is a separate problem, which means basically that you don't have, students don't hear smart conservative arguments, right? They only hear one side. And that makes them both feel like that's the only side that makes sense. And they're also incapable of actually putting together what the opposite side might sound like and whether or not it's actually tenable, right? So there's all sorts of problems with having a faculty that is pretty much united in political beliefs, even if most of the faculty aren't teaching politics as I wasn't. So the first time that I came back to my class after the election, it was a few days later for reasons that I don't even remember. And I was co-teaching. We had full-time programs. I was teaching a vertebrate evolution program, so nothing to do with politics. And my co-faculty got up and said nothing about the election and just gave a lecture on horse evolution, I think. And I thought, I was looking around the room, we had 50 students going, I don't think anyone is thinking a lot about horse evolution right now. I think no matter how you voted, and I imagined that, pretty much everyone, if not everyone in that room, had not voted for Donald Trump. I don't care how you voted, but you're in shock right now. And, in liberal enclaves like Olympia, Washington, where Evergreen is, what you saw on the street was this sort of slack-jawed, vacant-eyed look like, what just happened to us? Regardless of whether or not you thought it was, the next coming of Hitler, as some people clearly did, or just you were totally shocked that it happened. You really didn't think it was going to happen. It was the focus of people's emotional and therefore mental space. So my co-faculty ended a little bit early and people were getting up to go. And I said, hold on, we're not in class now. We have an hour and a half before lab in the afternoon. But anyway, we're going to go dissect sharks. Like, again, nothing political, right? Like, you just heard about horse evolution. We're going to go dissect sharks. But anyone who wants to stay, this isn't class time now, but I'd be happy to lead a conversation about the election and what just happened in the country. And again, I was just being very careful not to have this be, this is something that you need to be here for. This is something you're going to be assessed on. Fully 40 of my students stayed through their lunch hour, and we walked over to the lab together an hour and a half later. And I began with a little off-the-cuff monologue in which I said, regardless of how you voted, if you imagine that what just happened is a demonstration that half of our country is sexist or racist, you're wrong. That is not what is going on here. And if by me saying that, you think that I am giving cover to sexism or racism, you know me well enough now. And this was 5 weeks into a program, and I knew my students well. I said, I invite you to ask me what you think is in my heart of hearts. I certainly am not, and it shouldn't have mattered, but I was able to say then truthfully, I didn't vote for him. I didn't want him president in 2016, but that shouldn't matter. I knew then already, and I know many more people now who did vote for him, and I knew them to be good people, and I knew them to have come to a conclusion that I hadn't come to, but I understood them to have come to it honorably. And the idea that was being propagated in the mainstream media, which is also way too liberal to provide an honest take of like what's actually in people's hearts, was that the only explanation possible for why you could vote for Donald Trump was because you had bigotry. Mm-hmm. That was a terrible thing. So I gave this little monologue, and then we had a conversation, and it was very good. And I actually only got pushback from one student who was fairly woke, and I was able gently, it was a man actually, I was able to gently push back on him. And we had, when we broke, we had like 10 minutes or so to get over to the lab on the other side of campus. A number of students came up to me to talk to me in a small group. Several of them in tears. This was almost all women, and the three students, all independent of one another, were all women who said this to me, all three separate stories. Thank you so much. I'm a liberal. Again, it shouldn't be relevant, but giving your sort of cred up front, I'm a liberal, but I disagreed with this little, this piece of the ideology that is now being put forward. And I lost my friend group, said one young woman. I lost my job on campus, said another young woman. My friend lost her job on campus, said another young woman, and it wasn't the second woman I was talking to. People are losing livelihoods. These were part-time jobs, but my students were not rich, right? These are people losing jobs, people losing friends, for just slightly stepping out of the dominant ideology. And while I couldn't promise them anything, what they said to me was, what you said today in class in the wake of this election is the first time I've heard anything outside of the dominant narrative. And it gave me courage, and it allowed me to see that actually there is conversation that's possible. The conversation is necessary. It's part of what you're doing here in this podcast. And I think many people really legitimately think that they're the only ones. They're the only ones who are thinking these heretical thoughts. Like, really? Everyone who voted for him was racist or sexist? That can't be. And of course, there, I could choose 30 different things that I could say that are heretical thoughts, right? That you're not allowed to say out loud. And even if you think them, it means that you're not one of us. And once we know you're not one of us, we're going to exclude you. Well, having these conversations publicly and privately in groups helps assure people that actually, if that tribe kicks you out, that actually illiberal tribe who claims to be promoting liberal values, know that there are many of us out here who are welcoming of conversation and of people, even when I didn't vote like you, I don't agree with you about exactly where we are or what to do about it, but let's talk. Let's talk.
Heather, you have succeeded in giving me goosebumps in that answer. My gosh. Oh my goodness. I wish we had another hour to go because I've got so many more questions, but want to be respectful of your time and want to ask this. What question do you wish you were asked more?
I should have an answer to that. You keep stumping me. What question do I wish I was asked more? I don't know at the moment. Maybe I feel like a fool for not having an answer to that, but in my defense, I will say I have been asked so many questions since our book came out, and I'm thrilled. Like I actually have not yet had a conversation, and often Bret and I do these together, and sometimes I do them alone, sometimes he does them alone. We've done a ton of them, and I've actually truly enjoyed every single one of them, and they've all been different, and it's amazing. It's amazing to see where, only a couple of them have felt scripted. Certainly this didn't. I mean, you have ideas going in about what you want to ask, but, we're having a conversation here that's a back and forth. And as such, I am out of practice of thinking about if you could answer only one question, what would it be? Because at some level, I'm getting really tired of hearing myself talk, and I'd rather not. I'd rather be the one asking questions. One of the things that the COVID and the public response to it has done is, I've traveled almost not at all for over a year and a half, and I am so lucky to live with a husband and two teenage boys, our boys, that I absolutely adore. And we even still like each other after all this time.
Yeah.
But I am an explorer at heart, an explorer not just of physical space, but of other people, and an animal behaviorist at heart too. And so I love to go places and just observe people interacting and to interact with them. And what I really want to do is be finding new people and figuring out how they work. And this does scratch that itch to some degree because, I met you today. So that's big.
Beautiful. Heather, thank you so much. I loved the book. It is highlighted like crazy. And best wishes to you and Bret and your family. And thank you so much for the work that you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been truly a pleasure.
So many thanks to Heather Hying for sharing her story on the show this week. Please do me and Heather a huge favor and share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to our conversation. This was one of my very favorite conversations from all of 2021, and it just so happens to be the final episode of 2021. So be sure to share this with your network. Help spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Heather that I have on the show each week, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Also, if you could leave a rating and review of this podcast and let others know what you think, that would be so greatly appreciated. Think of it as a Happy New Year gift to me. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me at michael@thefollowupquestion.com or go to michaelashford.com and reach out there. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.